Okay. So, welcome, Jose. Very nice to have you with us. I think that we are all looking forward very much to know more about you and to understand your perspectives on cybernetics and education and your perspectives on architecture. So really exciting to have you with us. The way we do these webinars normally, you just do the talk, and we have agreed before that you will do the full presentation, and then in about 45 minutes, 50 minutes, we will invite questions and participation from everyone. So thank you all of the participants for being here. Happy New Year. This is the first webinar this year. We skipped the first webinar by mistake, just lack of logistic problems and so on. So this is our first webinar, and we are very, very happy to have Jose with us. So Jose, this is all yours. It would be nice if you introduce yourself to our community, okay?
All right. Okay, thank you, Angela. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you, all the organizers, and especially you and Elena, John, for the kind invitation. It's an honor and a pleasure to be talking to you. So my name is José Cabral. I'm a semi-retired architect in the University of Minas Gerais in Brazil. I say semi-retired because I actually retired, but I'm still teaching a few courses and supervising a few students and doing some research. So I'm still connected to the university, but dealing less and less with the bureaucracy, which is good. And so my proposal for this talk was this idea of cybernetics and education, architecture for freedom. So I thought it would be interesting to discuss my view on cybernetics and education, how as designers in Brazil, how we are dealing with that in respect to education. So my idea for the talk is to start first exploring this connection, this correlation between cybernetics and architecture. And after that, I'd like to show some examples of my experience in teaching in Brazil in the last 2 or 3 decades. And hope that will bring reason for us to enter into a dialogue and to have a conversation. I'm very curious to see your view on those arguments and things that I'm bringing here. So the way I built the presentation, I used some pictures of my students doing some exercise, and some of these images I will explain, and some of them are just there to work as a eye candy, as they say. So this first image is of a group of students doing a performance in appropriation of a space in a small village where we used to go and spend a few days there. And we very much use the idea of getting the body involved in discussing and recognize and building architecture. But first, I'd like to bring in 3 masters of cybernetics that enlightened me regarding this idea of cybernetics and architecture. First, Gordon Pask. I used to have an architectural practice, and I used to work a lot. I've designed many buildings, houses and housing schemes. And I was always trying to think how we could apply cybernetics to the design process, especially because of all the instability of the process, especially in Brazil. And then I was always looking for how to use cybernetics. And then I came across this Gordon Pask paper, The Architectural Relevance of Cybernetics, where he kind of invert this idea of applying cybernetics to architecture. And he says, it's a very well-known paper amongst designers and very much quoted. And he says that actually architecture had an influence on the beginning of cybernetics, and that the existence of architecture was important to help the formalization of cybernetics. And he says that architects are first and foremost system designers who have been forced over the last 100 years or so to take an increasing interest in the organizational, meaning non-tangible, system properties of development, communication, and control. And so he wasn't an architect, as everyone knows, but he was working with a lot of designers and architects, especially at the Architecture Association in London. And he got involved and very much interested in architecture. And in this paper, it's a short paper in the 70s, I think he put some ideas that not all architects follow or take this radical proposal. Because he says architects are system designers, but he says also the system that architects design are not just the building, are not the mortar and brick building. It's a system that includes the inhabitant. So the system that architects should design is a system that includes the observer, the inhabitant, the user. So it was a first twist in this idea of applying architecture, applying cybernetics to architecture. And then there is Ranulph Glanville, who I had the pleasure to know personally a year when I was in London studying and working with him. And he was all the time dealing with this connection between cybernetics and design, and was making these sometimes provocative arguments that, like saying we shouldn't, in this, when architects are trying to make design more scientific, he says, in fact, science is a subset of design, because all scientists design their experiment. So we should invert. And so he was always provoking. And it was a very fruitful relationship. And one day, talking about architecture and cybernetics, and trying to understand a few issues, and he told me, I think you should have a look on Glaserfeld's idea of cybernetics as an interplay of limits and constraints. And Ranulph usually would say that there is this connection between cybernetics and design that's radical. And he argued that cybernetics and design are opposite sides of the same coin. And he says that cybernetics is the theory of design, and design is the practice of cybernetics. But when he told me about this paper by Glaserfeld, I went and I found it very interesting. Because he says in this paper, cybernetics is the art of creating equilibrium in a world of possibility and constraints. And he gets this idea from Bateson, and on that paper by Bateson, a cybernetic explanation. And he remember as cybernetics shift the focus of attention from causes to constraints. And I thought that, well, that's really resonates with architecture, because architecture also establishes limits and constraints. We are all the time working with the establishment of limits and constraints. So perhaps there is this strong connection or strong similarity between cybernetics and architecture, as both deals with limits and constraints, but leave in an open space for freedom. And for me to understand this idea of architecture working with constraints and limits, it's better for us to go back to the beginning of architecture, the invention of architecture in the Neolithic period, 10,000 years ago. That is yesterday in terms of the humankind. Anthropologist from New Zealand, Peter Wilson, that he says he has a book about the domestication of the human species, where he raised this point that the first examples of architecture, as we know it today, were built during the Neolithic period, around 10,000 years ago, during the agricultural revolution. But for him, Neolithic architecture was a fundamental element in the process of the domestication of human species. And more important for us designers, he says architecture was invented not because of a technological development, but because it was a response to the need for privacy and attention, given the growing complexity of the new social structure of tribes transitioning from nomadism to sedentarism. So he says architecture was a kind of a tool to articulate the complexity of this growing society. And when we look at the examples of the Neolithic buildings, this one is in Scotland. It's amazing how similar to our buildings they are. If you think this is the beginning, 10,000 years ago, if you think of all the evolution we had in terms of technology, when you look at these images, you see, I can understand a room, a window, a door, furniture. So in a way, architecture hasn't changed much over these 10,000 years. It's really striking. And for me, one of the reasons architecture hasn't changed, meaning it has been serving humankind for 10,000 years with the same kind of structure, is because it has this, what I call a proto-cybernetic structure. I like to say that architecture can be seen as one of the first devices, the first instruments created by humans to manage information processing, reducing and controlling the amount of stimuli received from both their peers and from nature. Because the main reason was for architecture to diminish the stimuli you receive from nature or from your peers, allowing you to have private space, public space, to design this ethical domain. And it's amazing when we look at this old representation of buildings in Mesopotamia or Egypt. It's so similar to what we have in our plans for our buildings 3,000 years ago, 2,000 years, no, 5,000 years ago. So I'm proposing that we should see architecture as a proto-cybernetic environment that establishes limits and constraints, thereby enables freedom for its inhabitants. And from that, we can follow Stafford when he says that, when he's talking about this liberty machine, we can say that architecture is a kind of machine for freedom. Its output should also be freedom. But dwelling on Stafford Beer's idea of that equation of amplification variety or diminishing variety, I think we should use technology, meaning cybernetics, to amplify variety in the architectural object, amplifying variety in the regulator rather than diminishing people's variety. So that's an interesting idea that we should play with the variety of the architectural object and allow more space for freedom of the inhabitants. In this sense, we can say architecture is and can be a better tool for conviviality, to borrow the term from Illich. We did have some examples in the beginning, in the early 60s. It's a well-known, and every time we have to go back to Gordon Pask, Cedric Price, and John Littlewood with the Fan Palace, but it's still the best example of what should be a cybernetic architecture. What should be an architecture that actually increases the variety in the building in order to allow more variety for the user. So the Fan Palace was this, it wasn't built, but it was designed and developed. John Littlewood, that, I mean, it's the history that everyone knows, but it's nice to tell it again. John Littlewood, that was a theater director, invites Cedric Price to design this place for people to come and enjoy themselves and do whatever they want. And Cedric Price invites Gordon Pask and some other cyberneticians, Roy Ascot as well. And they create this idea of a building that doesn't look like a building, that people could just come in and change their shapes and their structure. So people could do whatever they want, and the building would be a tool for this freedom. It's amazing that it's a very much quoted, and everyone talks about this Fan Palace, but we look at our architecture today and said, God, it's 60 years after that, we haven't yet had anything close to that. And why is that? Why architecture hasn't changed in the way it could have changed? And I think there are many reasons that we're still doing architecture in the traditional way. But one of the reasons, I think, is because we have an educational problem. We educate our students to behave as the old architects would do. So we are, in a way, designing as 200 years ago. So it puts a challenge for us as teachers. What should be a course to teach students an architecture for freedom? So of course the answer is cybernetics. And again, I'd like to bring Ranulph Glanville, because I like to say that Ranulph Glanville was a humble activist, because he would say that his role was to create the field for the action of others. It's very humble. I think it's very nice of him. Oh, I'm actually creating the field where the others are going to play. So it's the art of enabling. And I'd like to think the teacher as a humble activist as well. Meaning, is a very active, you work a lot. It's much more difficult than to be the normal teacher, but you have a kind of a step back. You create the field to enable the students to learn, but learn from Gordon Pask, to learn how to learn from Gordon Pask and from Bateson. The most important thing is to create a structure for the students to be able to discover, to learn how to learn. So it's creating the field for conversation. So as a teacher, you should create this field for conversation, for interaction, for creativity. I like to tell the students that creativity is something that you can't teach, but you can learn. In order creating the field for freedom of the students. It's easier to say than to do that. So in my experience, when I say my experience, I have to emphasize that I worked with a bunch of other teachers over these 3 decades, and especially with one colleague of mine, Ana Paula Baltazar. We do a lot of research together. All these experiments are doing together. So these conceptual principles for this education. First, to go and ask the student to have a bodily engagement, because we are more and more living this digital world, and the students more and more are coming, and they're just staying on WhatsApp and this communication. So we use a lot of the body engagement, we use a lot of performances, and to get them involved bodily, but also to think about the body in this new digital environment. Play and games, nothing to do with gamification. We can have a lot of discussion because I think I'm I'm always working with play and games, but I think gamification is being used by corporations to actually to play around, but not to explore the possibilities of the ludic uh, aspects of design or anything of life. But use playing games to overcome this demand for transgression that we have all the time. So the idea that creativity can only come through transgression, I think creativity can come through play. Because play is not transgressive. Play, you have rules, you can't break the rules, but play is always open to novelty. So it's not so transgression is not the only way to access novelty. And also to explore a cybernetic dialogue, especially overcoming sometimes this clash between automation and interaction. So overcoming this dialectic, this opposition between interaction and automation. So exploring automation to have better interaction. So we use that to have interaction with the students, interaction amongst the students, interaction in the objects they are designing, interactions in the architectural object. Another source of inspiration is the Czech-Brazilian philosopher Willem Flusser. He is a Czech philosopher, but he lived in Brazil for many years. And he's a strong inspiration for us with his idea of technical images and how technical images, the images that are produced by computers, it can be an openness to dialogue. And he brings this concept of design as responsibility, not a design that respond, but that respond to the other. That is a different idea of when you think it's not just a reaction, but it's to be responsive is to respond to the other. also his idea of the homoludens that come, it's a lot of what I do, or what I think gets together with his idea of the homoludens, is this pervasiveness of play. And he says, if the new man is going to exist, it's going to be the homo ludens. And another concept that he developed that we used is he make an opposition between the tent and the cave. He says architects should inspire more on the tent than rather than in the cave, because the tent is about fluidity, is about flux, is about information, is about dealing with the wind, and the cave is about fixation, permanence, stability. And so we took this idea to go, and we even designed some immersive environments, thinking about this idea. Instead of having the cave as a virtual immersive environment, should think of the tent, a more fluid and more open. And also we ask the students to work in three kinds of spatialization, because I think, I mean, we kind of architecture, since the Neolithic was the locus of the humankind meeting, to meet the other, to have a conviviality. And now we are in these virtual environments that don't help much. So it's the idea of we lost our being in space. And so what should we do to recover the built environment as the locus of the human action? First, we can spatialize information, taking information outside the box, such as computer and other devices. Second, spatialize the interfaces, creating tangible interfaces more adequate to our body dimensions. Instead of just playing with my fingers, I could use my body again. And third, specialize in communication, because our communication is like we are here now communicating through this new media. And it's wonderful that we can, for instance, now be in all parts of the world talking and communicating, but it's a very limited kind of communication. So we should think about this idea of specializing communication, taking advantage of proxemics to optimize the non-spoken aspect of communication. Because when you have all those interfaces like in Zoom or whatever, WhatsApp, you have this idea of trying to communicate the non-spoken feelings, a hand or a face, or emoticon. It's not efficient. So those are the premises. And here's just some short examples. As teachers, we bring the students to work together. We say it's a kind of complicity. And so we do a lot of performances where they can see, they can participate, but we expose ourselves as well. And they are always working with this. I mean, we have this computer lab with postgraduate students, undergraduate students, and these students from this course, they actually work in the lab as well. So it's a mixture, it's a bit of a mess, but it's a very creative environment. So specialized information. Here's a lecture. They asked me to present a paper I wrote once about cybernetics and electronic music. So instead of reading the paper, I told them, okay, let's make an installation and specialize this information. So that's me a few years ago. And so we specialized this paper, and they could actually discuss and interact. So we did lots of installations specialize this information. Here is an installation we did with Pérez Gomes and Luis Pelletier, the Canadian architects, about one Pérez Gomes' books, Filho of the Dark Forest Revisited. We just project in a labyrinth of tissue, of fabric. We projected the image and you could enter, interact. And all these works, we do that, we involve the students. And here is an interface some students created to present other students' works. They called it a liquid control of interface. It's a projection in this piece of glass, and you have these glasses with water, and you interact with the information just to put your fingers. I have a video here. I don't know if it's going to go through. So we design. So the idea was to have this kind of generic interface that you could use any kind of media, and you could program different kinds of interaction. And we used it for a few other occasions. The other thing, the most difficult one, specialized communication, we did some experiments a long time ago, connecting two different communities, to very poor communities, to shanty towns in Belo Horizonte, two favelas. There are lots of favelas, and these two favelas, they didn't know each other. They weren't that far. So we worked with an NGO, and over 6 months, we gave a lot of workshops helping them to create some media to present themselves to the other communities. And then we had a one-day event where we project their media, but it was a long time ago, so getting an internet connection was so difficult. It was all over Skype. We didn't have all this technology that we have today. But it was a very nice experience. And all of these, I mean, they are experiments in the way that we are trying to discover things, and the students are helping, and it's always mistakes, and there's always a mess. Here are some examples of the media the locals created to be presented to the other communities. So they learned how to use QuickTime, and they made interviews, and they filmed their neighborhoods and project in this one-day event. The video quality is really bad, but it's just to give an idea of, we had this huge projection in a square, and people could interact with the images in the very early days of interaction, to get the camera reading your movements. And then we did the second experiment connecting specialized communication. That was a more controlled one. We had this connecting two different towns. Belo Horizonte is my hometown, and Araçuaí is a small town in the northern part of the state. And they have a lot of very interesting local artists. and Artscraft. And they were making this huge exhibition in Belo Horizonte in this very posh gallery. But people from Araçuaí, they wouldn't see the exhibition. So we proposed to make a connection between the two cities and create a event that would happen at the same time, at the opening of the exhibition in Belo Horizonte, and making an opening in Araçuaí. So we took a lot of videos from the exhibition in Belo Horizonte and make this immersive environment, what we call the digital tent. It's not a cave, it's a tent, because you can interact with the images. And and we invited a lot of different parts of the community in Araçuaí for them to see the exhibition in Belo Horizonte as it was happening. It was still Skype, a small window you could see there, and we kind of not duplicate the event, but create two events so people went there, and we had a lot of dancing groups, and so it's a capoeira group, and there is a people reciting poetry. Uh, and we had all those images being projected, and they could actually interact by gesture, uh, and at the same time they would participate with the opening of this exhibition in Belo Horizonte. Uh, Another experiment we did, specialized in communication, it was connecting Belo Horizonte, a square in Belo Horizonte, with a public space in Berlin, because we had a student in Berlin, and we called it long distance voodoo. So you had in, in Berlin, you had this voodoo doll with sensors that you could touch, and these sensors would activate the dancers in Brazil. So it was of course, playing with the idea of the first world doing a voodoo play with the third world. Uh, so it was a very interesting idea of trying to spatialize communication and to and we did also some design interface for participatory design. I'm not going to spend much time here, but uh, it was a challenge to put cybernetics in practice for design for homeless people. Uh, so we designed some interface they could actually interact. And then now get to these two experiments with teaching. The first one, I'd like to show you two different courses we did. The first one is we call Integrated Atelier of Architecture. It's a long course it's an introductory course to when the students get to the architectural course. It's a merger of three different courses: graphic and plastic design, introduction to IT, introduction to architecture. So we put everything together, and the students learn. They start learning software, some questions of automation, working with sensors and actuators, and discussing philosophy of architecture. And in the end, they have to design a physical intervention, an urban intervention in some place that would choose. Here they are playing learning to use sensors and actuators using a jigsaw where they can actually discover. It's very efficient. It's amazing. In one morning, they learn a lot. So here's exploring space. They have to do some performance to occupy spaces in the school. And then they create some interactive objects with this idea of expanding the interaction, open the interaction to the other. Here, this one is just some tubes with water that would light some LEDs. The other one, she dismantled one of these toys and made this garden you could play. And this was a kind of a wearable with sensors that would feel your movement. And this one is one of the teachers, Cristiano, who is a capoeira dancer. Here, just briefly, I mean, once in one semester, we asked the students to renovate the actual lab, so to make the lab more interactive. So they took over the lab. It was a total mess. It was crazy, but it was very interesting to. So they actually they try to understand the lab and the space of the lab and what could be automated, what kind of automation they could create in the lab. So they designed and went full into this idea of transforming the space. Here is a sensor. Like they developed this origami to censor sound. So some very low resolution screen that could feel the movement of people. And later on, we went to this kind of urban interventions. We would go with the students to a small village and stay there in an immersive weekend for 5 days, and then would go back on the end of the semester, proposing some urban interventions. So they would use their bodies to read the space and to think of what kind of intervention they should do. And they are all first-year students, so it's a way of to change the very paternalistic education they had on the secondary school. So that's and that was their intervention. So they also use this thing of water, but they created this fountain that instead of having water come from the tap, they had sounds from the tap. It was a beautiful intervention. And just so we did lots of these experiments with locating a space in the town, reading a bit of a history, the symbolic aspect of the space, and proposing. In this case here, it was a piece of paper in the floor that when you step on it, you actually activate some sound in this box over your head. And a way of signaling to the intervention. And the second course, uh, the second course I want to bring to you and to finish my talk is a course we did very much inspired by the Syntegration process design proposed by Stafford. It was a course for collaborative conversation with this theater group at São Gonçalo do Bação. São Gonçalo do Bação is a small village in the state of Minas Gerais, where I'm living now. During the pandemic, I moved to this small village and I decided to move there. And this theater group came to me asking if I could help them to design their headquarters, because it's a mining area and one of these companies would build their headquarters. So they asked me if I could help them in the design of their headquarters. And I told them, well, let's propose a course with my students, and we are going to help you to think about the design, but we are going to ask the students to design interfaces to help you think about the design instead of design the design. So it was inspired, it was an experiment to work with this idea of syntegration. It's just inspired, it's not a integration in the proper sense, because we had a lot of difficulties. Like first, it was during the pandemic, the lockdown. So it happened online, but it worked very well online. It's amazing. And then you can't have a proper integration because you have so many people come in and out, people that don't take part in one day, so you have to adjust. But we inspired in the idea of the parallel conversation that Stafford proposed, and we created the course with this idea of having a series of Syntegrações, as we call it in Portuguese. So the first one would be for the students to know themselves, because it was during the pandemic that they didn't know themselves. So it was a way for them to know themselves. Then a second integration for them to get to know the people from the theater group. And then another integration that would expand the people from the theater group who actually would have some kind of procedure to talk to people from the village. So you would actually grow this idea of in different levels and to include more people. So in the end, we had several experiments with this idea of integration. First, to what we realized, this brilliant idea by Beer, we could use it to study a building. So we did it as a way to, because when we asked the students to approach and to study a determinate building, sometimes we give them a structure, a matrix. So we did it using this integration strategy. So we developed, we found 12 concepts. We gave them four fields, matrix, the symbolic aspects of architecture, the bodily, corporeal aspects of architecture, the more intellectual and formal aspects of the architectural building, and the technical buildings. So each one of these four aspects, the students could choose 3 different kinds of keywords, and then you'd have 12 keywords, and then we would procedure some kind of discussion that would cover the whole idea of the building. We used it also because they loved it. They just loved it. And so we used it to study a book. They have to read this book by Hermann Hertzberger, So we ask them to choose which part of the book, you create the groups, and then develop some kind of parallel discussion with this idea of in one part you are discussing and the other part you are just being a critic, watching, and so it worked for several things. So the village here is just quickly this discipline. The village Bação has its origin in the 18th century and has a lot of problems with the mining companies. So we use this idea of having these discussions to also bring awareness of the problem to the population. Instead of telling them, oh, you should do this or that, we can allow them to think of or to have a more clear understanding of what was going on with these companies and the proposed interventions that the company usually bring to the so this is a huge wall they did because we had this disaster, one of the most horrible disaster in the world, and they created this huge wall in case one of the dams breaks. So it's very close to the village. So that's the very humble space of the theater group, and that's where they want to create this headquarters. So the students couldn't come to the place because of the lockdown. So I took a lot of pictures, and we did everything online. And we used Syntegration for them to read a lot of articles as well from Cedric Price and some other authors. And we took this Cedric Price's provocation. No one should be interested in the design of bridges. They should concern with how to get to the other side. So it's having a step back. So it was a course designed to let the students explore and to invent a way of how they should design. And we also, we like to say that we try to provoke two shifts. One shift from teaching to learn, the idea of a constructionist learning. And the other shift, so exploring a lot on this idea of peer-to-peer learning, taking it seriously. And the second shift regarding this idea of participatory process, participatory design. So instead of offering options to the people, local people, we actually offered them some interface. The idea was to design some interface to allow them to take this decision by themselves. So it's a, as you all know, it's the methodology of this integration beyond disputes. This idea is wonderful. I'm just go through, it's a very boring. So we had this this idea of Willem Flusser says that contemporary dispersal cannot be reversed. On the contrary, it requires a new form of assembly. Flusser says this new technology are dispersing everyone. And we thought that cybernetic strategies such as team Syntegrity can be this new form of assembly, where you really have, I don't like this idea of have horizontal, but it's a more integrated way of deciding things. And this idea of self-organization. So when we finished this, it was a short period course. It was just 2 months course. after we finished this 2 months course, the students and the people from the group theater, they asked if we could offer a second course. And then we did it, but we did another experiment with this very self-sufficient. So the students were actually alone with people from the theater, and the students were creating their way of interacting. And us teachers, we would have some meetings with the students behind the scenes. They would tell us the strategies they were proposing for the locals, and then we help them criticize to better these strategies. But it was a very interesting experiment as well. So the force integrations I've already spoken about. The feedback was really positive from everyone. Here, I just go through the interface the students designed. And we let them really decide what kind of interface they want to design after talking to this community. So one group decided to design a game, a jigsaw board game for raising social spatial memories. So they designed this table game where you could, with images from the village, and okay, I'll just go to finish. So they designed this board game. It was just a way to bring memories, and people would discuss their memories. The other group designed a set of pieces for helping people to problematize, inform their spatial demands. So they started from verbs and activities and created these small pieces that people could actually put together to problematize the idea of space. A third group designed a rather conventional website, but very well done, a digital platform to encourage a non-predatory form of tourism. And the other one designed a set of mobile physical structures that could be assembled by the population and used by the theater group. So just to finish, I think a cybernetic architecture should be thought of going towards a design process that's organized, but it's not random. But it's not predictable. So it's a organization with the organization is organized, but not the results are predefined. Also think about an open and reconfigurable architecture, and an architecture where the subject, the inhabitant, makes and unmakes him or herself through dwelling. And so an architectural education should mirror this cybernetic architecture, offering a structured framework that by setting limits and constraints creates space for freedom, a freedom that emerges through dialogue with the unknown, through the encounter with the other. And to finish, I think cybernetics should mirror the long-standing tradition of architecture, as it offers a structured framework that encompasses the symbolic, the bodily, the intellectual, and the concrete experience of the physical world. All of that through dialogue with the unknown, through the encounter with the other. So I think cybernetics could learn a lot from this idea of getting together the symbolic, the bodily, the intellectual, and the concrete. And of course, architecture learns a lot from cybernetics. Well, that's it. I hope you can bring some questions. I'm open to discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose. Thank you very much. Absolutely brilliant and very exciting, and for us, for this community, I'm pretty sure leave us with enormous amount of questions and excitement. So anyway, let's open the conversation. Who would like to start with a question?
Should I stop sharing, Angela?
Yes, you can stop sharing that, then we can see each other in the screen and see who would like to engage.
Angela, hey, Theodora.
Theodora, yes, please.
Good evening. Thank you, Professor, for your very interesting presentation. Well, I must say that I didn't understand some of your statements, but let's go back to Norbert Wiener. He's the author of Cybernetics, and the definition of cybernetic is that is a science of communication and control between the machine and the animals in the beginning, in the origin, but now between machine and the people. So what do you think is there is an involvement of artificial intelligence, which is the derivative of cybernetics, actually. So I really, maybe, I'm sorry, but I didn't really understand what definition of cybernetics you use in architecture. Thank you.
Oh, it's a complicated question.
I know.
Yes, I know. Well, I'll try to see. Yeah, Norbert Wiener, he was one of the creators of cybernetics, I think. And Hans von Foster says, I mean, every cybernetician has its own definition of cybernetics. And he says, that's very interesting. Because if you go to Stafford Beer, he has his definition of cybernetics. If you go to Maturana, if you go to Ashby, it's a wonderful definition. All of them are very enlightening. And I think they are not contradictory. They complement. But when you go to what's called second order cybernetics, you open a lot. I mean, after Margaret Mead proposed that we should apply cybernetics to cybernetics itself, it opens a lot. And I think my approach to cybernetics deals a lot with that, with the inclusion of the observer, instead of just being the observer observing a system. Not that Wiener wouldn't, as Ranulf used to say, Wiener and all those guys at the beginning, they were really clever and seeing already what was going to come in second order cybernetics. So for me, it's the most interesting aspect of cybernetics, the inclusion of the observer and how it allows us to have a formal approach to this kind of things that psychology would describe and other science would describe in a very informal or in a very, very difficult way. And cybernetics allows us to have a very formal way. It's interesting to see that even some psychoanalysts like Jacques Lacan was drawing from cybernetics as a way to formalize this relation between people. So for me, I don't know if I answer you, but for me, the most interesting aspect of cybernetics is when it allows the connection to the other and to the unknown within the other. So for me, that's the role of technology. Is the most important thing, is allow me to start a dialogue with you, Theodora, with you all, and try to understand this, what's sometimes difficult to understand, to overcome these barriers.
Thank you.
So
Just a short comment, and then I'll end, because otherwise I might ask something else as well. Taking the observer into the conversation, that means that this is third order cybernetics already, which is the Robert Vallée. But we are failing in social cybernetics. So this is the part that you're talking about, or the branch of the cybernetics is social cybernetics. And then I understand, but maybe I disagree in a way, because especially I disagree when you said that we are dwelling meaning doing nothing. So just accepting. So thank you very much, Professor. It's hello from Slovenia, Ljubljana, as Europe. Thank you.
Thank you,
all right.
Theodora. And thank you, Jose. Jonathan has a question.
Thank you, Jose. That was very interesting. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What I liked was that you have not taken the normal path of education. One of the problems I have with education is it throws theory at people, and then somehow it gives them training. But by the time they get training experience, they've largely forgotten the theory. So from my perspective, what I always like to do is to build the instincts. And then let them discover the theory for themselves, which seems to be what you're doing. What instincts are you trying to build into an architect?
Well, I would say I like this idea of building some instincts. I would say the first one is generosity. Um, and I think generosity and the ability to have awe, to have admiration for the beauty. I will quote Ranulph again. Ranulph once told me, "Oh, I'm interested in cybernetics because of its beauty, not because it works or it didn't work, but because it's beautiful." And I think for the students, for me, generosity, because I think that's the main instinct for an architect. You have to be able to see the other, to be generous with the seat, with the space, with the environment, with the other, and that's something that you can only do uh, by living in. I mean, you can teach that, but you have to it's a very tricky situation because you can't tell people, oh, just be generous. But oh, yes, I am generous. But to create the situations, and even when they are playing amongst themselves, and there's a lot of competition with the students, but they come from very competitive secondary school. So we have to disarm them. So we use Hayes von Foster idea of A is better off if B is better off. And explain to them, okay. And then for them, it's totally new, but it's amazing that it's got some results when they see it in practice, not when they learn from theory or when you tell them, but when they see, when you get them involved in this, especially when we do this immersion traveling where they are apart from their families. It's amazing how it changes them.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan and Jose. Anyone else would like to comment? Yes, Alena, and then John.
I wanted to appreciate how much I thought that the flexibility of the structures was important. Stafford went several times, I accompanied him, to do seminars at the Durham in Britain. And the first several years we did it, we were in a facility where there were like movable tables and chairs, and the sessions went very well. The last year, they had changed the architecture of the room so that they had put in a U-shaped, granite-topped boardroom type of structure with fixed chairs. And it really impeded discussion and conversation and people able to work together because they couldn't actually get up and move their chairs. And it just seemed to me that that was maybe a structure that was reflecting a previous assumption of a hierarchical, rigid, narrow conception of what one could do when one was attempting to make decisions.
Yeah, I think it's a very nice observation, Lena. People don't realize how much the actual design of the environment can determine the way people behave and how you can cut the possibilities of freedom in a space. So I think that's one thing that we try hard with the students for them to understand that the actual design can be in another place and allow for people to raise their question, to raise their way of living or way of dealing with things.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elena and Jose. John.
Marcus?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Professor Cabral, for your really fascinating talk. For me, it was a wonderful panorama of designs a process is designed in a way that good designs come out. So you have also created wonderful designs here. I'm preoccupied with one thing. In the country I live in, we have very good architectural schools, but we are building a lot of rubbish. We are building lumps of concrete, one by the next. Lumps of concrete, very little good architecture. Can you give me a small clue or a hint or whatever?
Yes, I think it's an amazing problem because I mean you see we have when we look at cybernetics, when we look at the people who work in the early days of cybernetics and design, so they point. I mean, there's several examples, Gordon Pask, and several examples that could inspire people. I don't know. I think of course, there is a problem with capitalism in general. I think that's a problem with this idea of profit before anything. But I think for me, some of the problem is because people don't know cybernetics. Because if they knew, because people are always afraid of losing their way, of losing control. If they ever know that you can have a different kind of control, that's much more interesting than the control they are actually trying to have, either in the aesthetics of their building or in how their buildings control people. So for me, I really think that if people understood profoundly all the aspects of cybernetics, they would be better designers and we would have better seats, better buildings.
Thank you very much. May I add a second question?
Oh, please.
You showed us about this integrations you realized with your students. I wonder what, you had 4 integrations. Did you always use the same opening question or different opening questions, and what were they?
Well, we used, in different times, we used different strategies to let them to formulate these open questions. So in the last integration, they did with the local people that we teachers didn't take part. So they themselves decided what would be the main key aspects they would like to investigate. So the second integration, when they it was actually the third, because the second was a integration around the reading some texts. But the first integration that they were in touch with the locals. So we asked, and everyone came with several ideas of what could be, what should have, what would be the items for discussions. And so it was a very open question, and they were coming like a problem jostling and getting closer and closer until they got to this definition. So it varied a lot. So we had to adjust a lot, because people would vary, the number of people and the problems. So it's amazing, but that's the idea, to have an adjustable and a very systemic, adjustable structure.
And it worked. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus, and thank you, Jose. We have John Walker first, and then Czeslaw.
Okay, Jose, that was wonderful. I really enjoyed it, particularly all your insights into education, which reflect very strongly on my upbringing and my grammar schools in England, which were horrific. So I just love everything. My question also involves integrations, and we've done a number of integrations between us, and they're always a discrete event that you start off and you have the 2 or 3 days and you come to your conclusions. And over the years, many people have said, why don't we use integrations as an ongoing process to organize whatever? And you mentioned new forms of assembly. And I wondered if you had any insights into whether you could take the principles of integration and redesign them as an ongoing process rather than a series of discrete events.
Yeah, hi, John. Yes, I mean, I think that's one very interesting point about integration. I had one master's student who did his work around this idea of integration, and he was trying, and I was pushing him, but he didn't respond enough. I mean, he didn't. I want to push him to do really radical experimentations with this integration. The idea of for me, when I designed this course, was the idea of having like a flower of integrations. Like one integration, then we have different integrations expanding until you could reach the community. And roughly it worked in the way to expand. And the course was a kind of a series of discrete integration, but it was a continuity in a way. Okay. But I think it is. I see this integration as a tremendous tool for political activity. I ask my friends who are into politics, I think you should use integration to work with a huge group of community, because it's so useful and it changes people. It's not only an assembly where people can vote, you can say this and that, but it's an opportunity for people to understand and to change themselves. So I think it's a tremendous political tool. That I mean, in pragmatic terms, I really wanted some colleagues. I have some students going into politics, and I tell them you should use it to expand and experiment. And this idea of having an ongoing integration, I think it's perfect.
Yeah, it's a lovely idea. So far, nobody's worked out how to do it. Whether it's possible or not remains to be seen, but I really hope it is.
We have to try, because when we try, we discover a lot of problems and possibilities.
I mean, this definitely.
Thank you.
I'll comment more in a minute about that, but definitely is a possibility for collaboration and thinking together in the future. So, Czeslaw, we have 2 questions, and then I'll do the final one. Yes.
Thank you very much for. Can you hear me correctly? Can you hear me? Okay, good, because I have to. Anyway, thank you for a very inspiring lecture. And for me, what is interesting for me that you've exposed the problem of politics and architecture. For instance, if you take the old temples or temples of any kind, they had to make people, minimal, small. This is the power of God, So it was for instance, when you can see the difference between the Catholic churches and Protestant churches, where gold and then no decor, etc. My point is, to what extent are there some streams in theory of architecture which expose this semantics of politics precisely? That the symbol and politics in the building, of course, because and the building, we can refer, for instance, to Michel Foucault with the shapes of different buildings, etc. But are you a pioneer in this field? Probably not. But what are the systems apart from cybernetics? What I like very much that you mix cybernetics with this old problem of politics and architecture and control. I wouldn't say democracy comes next. First, I would expose the feeling of freedom and control, and then comes whether control is executed in a democratic way or in a non-democratic way. Summing it up, what about the broader theory of this in theory of architecture, and how could it be mixed up with theory with cybernetics? Thank you very much.
Well, I don't know if I understood your question right. So
I can repeat,
Yes, please.
Theory of architecture, whether the semantics, whether you ask the semantics of architecture, I mean the meaning of buildings, and then adding to this politics. Politics is always about power, architecture, power, and then you've added to this the interpretation based on cybernetics. And my question is, what about theory of architecture in this case, referring to political meaning, the political semantics of structures? Is it precise sufficiently? It's not an easy question, It's not an easy question. I think it's correct in English, but this is quite sophisticated. Semantics of buildings, the meaning I am living here, independent house, Le Corbusier, for instance, a complete different sense of cohabitation than having the independent houses, etc. So once again, about the semantics of politics in architecture and cybernetics in this case.
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting, very profound question, and it's a trick. It's a trick point there, and I think, I'm teaching just first-year students. It's just the beginning, but we envisage the way things could be, and I think for me, what I love about this possibility of having cybernetics is the idea of encompassing different levels and different areas. And for me, this is politic in a way. If you change the design process, where you can actually include people, you can change the actual building, where the building can be richer and can enhance the relationship with people and between people. For me, this is very political. And also, and even in aesthetic terms, because you are right, architecture uses aesthetics as a way to oppress people, to convey meaning, but in an oppressive way. So if you actually think of the possibilities of meaningless buildings, buildings that are value-free, as Cedric Price used to say, there are not many examples, but that's the idea, to have value-free buildings where the value would be given by people when they use it. And I think perhaps that's one of the reasons they didn't allow the construction of the Fun Palace, because it was actually giving the power back to people to decide even how the space would be articulated. So for me, it's this, it can be a revolutionary way of doing architecture if you change all the levels, the design process, the actual building, and the idea people dwell in their building. I don't know if I answered you.
Yes, thank you. It's very inspirational for me. So now I stop now. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Shesla, for a wonderful question. And Jose, I think that you have also answered in some way some of the previous question from Marcus Schwaninger. So very interesting. So let's go for the last question, and I'll make a final comment, Brian.
Yes, thanks. I'd like to echo Elena's theme, which, is harping on Jose's theme, if that makes sense, with my example of a building I worked in the centre of Sydney, which was more than 20 stories high, concrete building. One day, soon after I started working there, I was going up in the lift and there was someone else who turned out to had been an actor in Z Cars, British movie about police. And he said, I often notice colleagues coming back after the Christmas holidays with a smile on their face, and it's only about a week that the smile lasts there. And he attributed the change to the building. When I felt need for relief, I'd leave the building and go to a smaller building around the corner. And the contrast was amazing. It was only 2 stories high. You ascended a circular staircase. Adjacent to the steps were stained glass windows. And it was such a relief to go into that architecture. That's all.
Oh, very nice, Brian. I think that's the power of architecture that not many architects can deal with. I mean, they all think they have this power, but to actually explore this power of open so people can actually be happy. It's funny because I mean, we do have traditional architects that could, even if we're not working with cybernetics or even technology, but they had a kind of generosity in their design that would create space for people to be happier in there. So I think it's very inspirational.
Thank you, Brian and Jose. I just want to make a final comment. Listening to your talk, I find it amazingly inspiring and very exciting to see the way that you have relate, architecture and design and participation, and the idea of cybernetics in creating all this feedback and communication between people and reinventing the idea of designing. And I think that you open a way, like a way to get inspiration from your work when we think about designing organizations. Because if we take the VSM from Stafford and Team Syntegrity, and we think about the way an organization is trying to interact with the niche, and how, well, all these new ideas that emerge, like co-creation, in which people will be co-creating a product or a service between the workers in an organization and the people in the environment, then you think that your approach could be very, very interesting to come and use it as well in the context of co-designing an organization between workers and people. And I just think that it opens a really interesting opportunity for working together, and the use of integration in that context, the way that you have used it, is beautiful. I think that it is 100% compatible with Stafford's dreams about the power of integration. And I agree with you, and perhaps it's something we could talk in the future about the power of integration to create, to generate a new, different way of making politics. Yeah. So there are two aspects, like in an organization, in the relationship with the customers, but also in the society. If you wanted to use integration in that context to generate and get people fully involved into the design of their own society. Yeah. So in that respect, I think that you is really inspiring, very beautiful and very exciting. And I just want to thank you again for being with us. Thank you, Jose. It's been fantastic webinar. I don't know if Peter, who's been making some comments, want to have the final comment. Peter Tubelman?
No, that's fine. Thank you. This has been wonderful. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone, and hopefully we'll see you next month. We have the seminar from our people from India, Suhai and his colleague. They are going to be talking also about education and emotions in a BSM context. The webinar is going to be earlier because of the time difference with India. So we're going to start 1 hour earlier on the March webinar. So thank you very much and hope to see you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you,
Thank you
Jose.
all. Bye.